20 more projects that we work on. I'll pop our website details up at the end, so you're more than welcome to take a look at that to discover all the other projects that we work on. But of course, we can't deliver those projects alone, and we have very strong working relationships with a variety of organisations. And one of those is the Suffolk Climate Change Partnership. The Suffolk Climate Change Partnership is a working partnership made up of all the local authorities in Suffolk. Their vision is for Suffolk to be an exemplar in tackling climate change and protecting and enhancing its natural environment, and to be the country with the greatest county with the greatest reduction in carbon emissions. Their vision was strengthened last year when each of the Suffolk authorities declared a climate emergency and share the ambition for Suffolk to become carbon neutral by 2030. And one of the projects that we deliver on behalf of the Suffolk Climate Change Partnership is its Community Energy Advice Service. So we provide free energy audits to community buildings in East and West Suffolk, and these audits really help to identify what energy efficiency improvements these buildings can be making in order to reduce their running costs and to reduce their buildings' carbon footprint. We can also provide grant and funding support to help them actually implement the identified savings in the report. And alongside that, we can also provide advice to parish councils and communities who are either looking to set up their own environmental action groups or energy groups. But we can also provide informal advice if you're not quite at that stage yet. So if you just want a bit more information on how to improve recycling in your community, I'm more than happy to provide support and advice on that as well. So just as a key example, one of the village halls we worked with is Freckenham, based in West Suffolk. They first received support in 2014 when they received 16 solar panels, which reduced their energy consumption by a third. In 2018, they came back for a second time, and it was recommended that they replace their heating system and upgrade to LED lighting and install loft insulation. Overall, these schemes of works have saved them approximately £1,000 in their running costs and have achieved a total saving on their carbon footprint of 6.5 tonnes of carbon. Jane, one of the trustees at Freckenham Village Hall, has just provided a short quote and saying that the support from the SCCP advisor really helped them to focus their plans and get the funding they needed to be able to make the changes possible. So that's a great example of just the work that we do under that energy advice service. Moving on to a brand new scheme that we have literally only just started last month. Earlier in 2020, the SCCP approached Groundwork to see if we could develop an additional service to offer communities to help them take climate action. The first step in this was to ask communities what they actually wanted from this service and what they needed, and also to find out what the demand for such a service would be. From this, we commissioned a survey, and from that it was determined that communities would benefit from a net zero action planning service, and Hoseley in East Suffolk was chosen as the community to pilot this. This is a really exciting project, and it will include estimating Hoseley's current carbon footprint through a householder survey and energy audits for key community assets. And this work will all feed into the production of a net zero action plan, which Hoseley Parish Council and the community can then implement. So as well as support from the Suffolk Climate Change Partnership and East Suffolk Council, Councillor James Malander has also provided his support. He is actually on the call now, as he will be taking part in the Q&A session a bit later. So James, I would just like to invite you now to comment on the Hoseley project, if you would like.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. We're really excited in Hoseley, and I'm particularly excited to implement and pilot this scheme where we're engaging with the entire community. And I think, particularly with the environment, we can support each other. Sometimes people find it very isolating and people have an issue of, why am I bothering, no one else cares. But while working together as a group, I think we can pull out strengths and weaknesses from all of us and really become part of a team And one thing that COVID has shown us is that not only do people engage and want to engage with nature, but people care and they want to care about their communities. So I think this is coming exactly the right time where people are coming together and we can all work as a group to see how we can make improvements. We're really grateful to Groundwork being able to implement a roadmap for Hoseley, and then we can really have a direction of where to take it forward. Often the issue is so complex and so big, people don't know where to start. So we're really looking forward to seeing fundamental direction of where we can start, the big improvements, and how we can share resources. Hoseley in particular is almost a little typical village. It's got a school, a church, a village hall, a pub. So it picks up all those elements. And I know from this pilot scheme that we'll be able to learn from that and then break them off to other communities. And I really hope this will be a project that we can adapt to all the other villages, particularly in rural isolation. Rural concerns for the environment are sometimes difficult and it is a challenge. So I really hope this is going to be a really important tool going forward.
Thanks, James. Yeah, it definitely will be, 100%. And like I say, we're really excited at Groundwork to be working with you on this. And yeah, we really hope that we can be able to put together a support package that we can offer out to other communities across Suffolk to really drive the change and help Suffolk become carbon neutral by 2030. That's the end of the first sort of session, as it were. My contact details are up on screen now, so if you have any questions on what I've just spoken about, or if you'd like more information, please do get in touch. I've also put the websites to Groundwork and Green Suffolk, so again, if you would like to take a look at any of the projects that we're undertaking at Groundwork, but also the wider work of the Suffolk Climate Change Partnership, then please do check those websites out. So now moving on to the Q&A session. We have 4 excellent speakers. We have Graham Duxbury, who is Chief Executive of Groundwork UK. We have Councillor James Malander, Cabinet Member for the Environment at East Suffolk Council. Richard Powell, OBE, who is currently Director of the History of Advertising Trust. And we also have Jane Healy, who is Chair of the Greenprint Forum. So I think we can all agree that 2020 hasn't exactly been the year that we had planned, and that COVID has changed all of our lives. It's also reinforced a lot of weaknesses in our economy and in our society that mean marginalised communities are suffering the most. And as we eventually return to some sort of normality, which I know at the moment seems quite far off, but we will get there. But society has a huge opportunity to build back a better world, and one that is fairer, more robust and more sustainable. And we all have a role to play in helping to shape what we want this world to look like, particularly in relation to the environmental and social justice. And there's a lot of talk at the moment about a green recovery, and there does appear to be a real willingness to do things differently this time when you compare it to the recovery from the 2008-2009 financial crisis. So my first question really is, how can we actually achieve a green recovery, and one that has nature and climate at its heart? So Graham, I'm going to come to you first on this, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you, and hello everybody. Lovely to be here. So just to explain how I fit into all of this, so I run Groundwork UK, which is the national umbrella body for the whole of groundwork across the UK. So what we exist to do is support and promote activities such as the stuff going on in East Suffolk, which is kind of blazing a trail in terms of community-led action on climate. And across our network, we are talking quite a lot about green recovery. And probably that's the first thing I'd say. There's a lot of talk about green recovery. Probably there's less action than most of us would like to see. And maybe part of the problem is that we're looking in the wrong place for the leadership on this, as a lot of organisations looking to central government and the kind of, the big ticket recovery pieces of work and the big investments that need to happen, all the infrastructure build that is being prioritised. And maybe that is the wrong place to look for the first shoots of a green recovery. Maybe we should be looking much more at a local level, at a local authority level, at a town and parish level for the real driver to deliver a green recovery. Because from my perspective, that kind of recovery is all about resilience. And resilience is about having the ability to cope with challenge in the here and now. And actually even talk of a recovery seems a bit premature at the moment. We're still mid-crisis, and we don't know where the end point of this is going to be. So making sure we've got that resilience in the here and now is important. But it's also about having the capacity to drive change in the future. And that, for me, absolutely starts with local communities. And the other lens I put on this is the lens of inequality, because a green recovery has to tackle existing structural inequalities in our societies. So we've seen that many of the inequalities that are now very obvious to us were existed before the pandemic. They've just been exacerbated and highlighted by COVID. So we had health inequalities embedded in our society way before this, but it's obvious that the groups in society most impacted by the virus were those that were suffering greatest health inequality before the virus. Economic inequalities have really come to the fore, because those people who are being most impacted by the restrictions attached to lockdown are those people who were in the least secure jobs, the least secure parts of the economy, older workers, younger workers. We're seeing that on the news. And then we've also have a raft of environmental inequalities in society. So we just need to think about who's been able to access private garden space or parks and gardens near where they live. And that's a really kind of unequal distribution of access to environmental benefits and environmental goods. So for me, a green recovery has also got to be a fair recovery. So that's the message that we're putting out, that we need green and fair to be at the forefront of all of this, because we need that recovery conversation to focus on those inequalities. And we need to use carbon reduction and nature recovery as drivers for achieving this. So in practical steps, you know, we can do things with the infrastructure that central government is putting in place. So there's a kickstart scheme for employing young people. We can create more green jobs as a result of that. There's lots of focus on retraining. We can embed carbon literacy training as a core skill alongside maths and English and functional skills. That would support the aim of a green recovery. There's a whole tranche of investment and measures going into energy efficiency schemes. But most of those are about kind of capital investments and hard measures. We need a behaviour change programme sitting alongside that. That also provides support for people in fuel poverty. And then there are big ideas floating around. Lots of environmental organisations are working together on something called the National Nature Service, which again would create a whole host of jobs by delivering practical improvements in the biodiversity of local environments. So I think there's lots of ingredients. There isn't really a big push that I can see coming from central government to make this a reality. Some of the bits and pieces they're putting in place are there for us to use at a local level in order to bend in this direction. And I think whether we achieve a green recovery or not, I think will depend on the strength of the local partnerships that we put in place, partnerships like this, to take those ingredients, really make them work, tailor them to the needs of local populations and local communities, and deliver the impacts and the outcomes that can then influence wider practice.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So Richard, if I can come to you with the same question, how can we achieve a green recovery? Oh, Kerry, can you just unmute Richard?
Hi, like Graham, a bit of context, because some people might wonder what the Director of the History of Advertising Trust is doing here tonight. I spent 25 years as Director of the RSPB, so most of the nature reserves, the RSPB reserves in the east of England from the Humber to the Thames, I oversaw the creation or the extension or the management of all those nature reserves. So I've worked in the climate change, sustainability, environment world for nearly 35 years. And now I work as a consultant, in inverted commas. I help charities create their governance reviews and how they create their business plans, but I also still work for Northumberland Water and others on climate change and the environment. So that's the context. So, like Graham, yes, the green recovery is going to be pushed nationally, and I think it is different this time than what we've seen before. There is a groundswell, I think, from communities and individuals understanding that actually we do need to make a big difference now. And I think COVID, in some respects, has helped that with lockdowns, people moving and walking and being in the countryside and actually reconnecting with the countryside. We have got to a place where we had disconnected so far from the environment that I think in some, a positive, if you like, out of COVID has been that reconnection. And you only have to look at some of the social media sites to see people tweeting about flowers, about birds, about insects, and all sorts of things. So that understanding that it plays a big part of their life, both in their sort of health and well-being, but also in their, in their soul, I think is much more relevant this time than in previous crises, as it were. I think we have to think differently. I think we will have big national organisations like the Environment Act and the Agricultural Act, etc. But I think we also have to think differently how that's going to be happening at a community level. So, why isn't every parish got an acre of wildflowers? Why are we not tripling the size of hedgerows? Why are we not creating bigger and wider joined up habitats between the side? Why aren't we looking after trees? Why are we building communities that don't have green space, etc.? And I think those sorts of questions are now really coming to the fore. And I think local politicians and local authorities are now starting to get this, without a doubt. And I think you're seeing a groundswell of understanding that actually people's lives and people's drive and wish is to have some of that green space and that green recovery. So we'll have huge things like the agricultural bill and food standards and all that sort of thing. We'll have the environment bill looking at nature recovery strategies and the way that the 25-year plan for nature is implemented, and farmers of course play a huge part in this, and of course farmers are all part of our community. So you're starting to see lots of things joining up, and I think that's a real positive way forward. I think we really do have to think differently. I jokingly said, why don't we double the size of hedgerows in inland? But why don't we? What is actually stopping us from doing some of these sorts of things? Now, you could argue it'll take away a little bit of food production land, but we also perhaps grow the wrong food. So we've got to look at the way that we move forward. 90% of our salad crops comes in from Europe. We're now leaving Europe, so we've got to change the way that we do things there. So it's about massive change, I think, and then looking at that change to see how that can be implemented at our local level. Because at the end of the day, we live in a locality. We don't live on an industrial estate. And it's that connectivity with nature, which I think is a real way forward.
Perfect, thank you. And now, Jane, if I could please come to you again with the same question.
Yes, hello. People who may not know why I'm joining this and speaking here, I'm the chair of Greenprint Forum, which is a group represents groups of environmentalists in East Suffolk, and we report into East Suffolk Council. And I very much think that we need a national plan for green recovery. I think that's what's really fundamentally lacking. I think that quite a lot of the things that I think have already been said, but there's quite a lot of local groups like the ones that are represented by the forum who are beavering away and planting trees and making a difference in their communities, and very much led by volunteers and passionate people, but I don't think they've taken everybody with them, and I think that to some extent they can only go so far. A point comes to mind. Somebody was doing a biodigester in Rendlesham, and they were unable to connect up and power the whole of Rendlesham because of the national grid and the way it was laid out. so that you have to have a strategy that's going to have a national factor to it, as well as, I think, the local factors. And you know, there's obvious examples why are we allowing new houses to be built that aren't carbon neutral, you know, aren't zero carbon. They're because they're not zero carbon, they're using you know, the resources of the national grid, and we're having to produce more power for them. So I mean, it's just a you know, why aren't we doing passive house, that sort of thing. I think there has to be a national plan, because you need to look at the whole of land use throughout the country. We need to sort of up on things like salt marshes, where you've got obvious carbon sequestration points, which could easily be done. You need to up on things like peatlands and restoration of those, and as carbon sinks. So that would take quite a sizable amount of our carbon out of footprint, reduce it. So I think the whole of the land use nationally, in terms of how it's farmed and how much farming is done, how much is given over to biodiversity, you know, obvious things like Wild East that's going on. They need a lot of these, you know, sort of things to join up to really, really make an impact and have a good recovery.
Lovely, thanks, Jane. And finally, Councillor Mullender, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. You know, really, the fundamental thing here is about choice. Last year, the UK government spent £2.50 per person on trees, spent £40 per person on road building and maintenance, and £160 per person on direct and indirect subsidies for the fossil fuel industry. It's as simple as that. It's by getting the right politicians and the right leaders in the place that make those decisions that will make a fundamental difference of how to have that sort of overview of those big decisions to change behavior. Ultimately, we have to change behavior, but also it's about managing expectations. And there's something quite scary about the climate emergency and ecology issues, that people feel powerless. And you see the TV programs, you see what's happening around the world, and you think, how can I make a difference? And so one of the things I work quite hard on is to try and empower people to understand that the smallest of changes that they make does have an impact. Although you don't see it, by dropping that piece of litter that migrates down to the water system, that enters the sea, does affect something somewhere else. So it's that message across to people that they can make a difference, although they may not immediately see that. And of course, there is a misconception that being environmentally friendly lowers your life standards, your quality of life. In fact, it's the opposite. By engaging with nature, by understanding to make a difference, and by caring, affects us on so many levels. It's really important. I know particularly in East Suffolk, and I work with Jane on the Greenpoint Forum, we do a lot of outreach work, so the Greenpoint Forum, and through the community partnership this week of events, where we listen to people. This is the important thing. It's listening to what individuals, communities want, and how we can empower them, and how we can develop a roadmap. Often when the environment is something from afar coming down, the system breaks. You've got to get people engaged, because everybody has to be involved. There's often an issue where people point and it's always somebody else's fault, but ultimately it's your choice, and your choices that you go to the supermarket, how you buy food and how you live will have an impact when it's collectively made. So at East Suffolk, we're looking at sort of educating people, trying to act also responsibly and showing an example how we can make a difference. You know, at Melton House in East Suffolk, we have started doing some landscaping of planting a meadow and nectar-rich flowers to show how you can make a very simple difference. And of course, I spend a lot of time talking to people to understand what the issues are. So it is very complex. We should avoid focusing just on one aspect. I see it time and time again. I know we're particularly talking about carbon neutrality now, but there's no point in looking at projects that are carbon neutral and then ignoring the fact that you may be destroying landscapes and all sorts of other diversity to reach that carbon neutrality. So you have to be really careful, because as with nature, everything is really interconnected. So it's important to take that larger view as well as taking that micro view. So there's a lot to do. Of course, we have to remember, and perhaps here today, we've spoken to these people. You speak to an echo chamber at times when we look at the environmental issues. We all know we have to do something, and we have to make changes in how we live. But when we come out of COVID, there will be a large section of the community that will just want to go back to exactly how it was before, because they feel secure by the old ways of working. So it's about educating and showing the improvements. And this is the perfect time to do it, as we all know, that we can look at life differently. And that engagement with nature is a really important thing. It's not a binary relationship. We shouldn't be saying it's nature or building or it's a house. They have to work together. And nature can work and enhance and make us better as people. We all know the statistics that if you spend time outside and engage with feeding birds and planting flowers, etc., you are psychologically and spiritually and mental health issues are much more better. Your mental health is better by doing that. So it's getting that communication to people. And of course, making it simpler. We have a concern about recycling. That's part of the issue here with how we deal with our waste. So we have to make these things simple. And it's all got so convoluted by leaving it in the market economy. Lots of people dominate it and the wrong message gets across. So it's about control. It's by coming away from those embedded behavior that we can look at things differently and try and make a change where it's really needed.
Lovely, thanks. So just picking up now on the specific role that communities have, what's their role in all of this? James, you want to carry on?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, communities are key on this. It's great to have those people, and I know there's many on the call today that are dedicated in making a difference. But it's also getting that message out, and it's like a little Chinese whisper of whispering through of how important it is. And those ambassadors are so important to show a direction and the way that we can start functioning together. And sometimes people just need an encouragement, or even just highlighting that if you do this instead of this, it makes a very big difference. And also it's about politics and control. You can control your own sort of destiny, your environment. It's your environment. You know, councils in Suffolk, we're part of the community as well. It's not an external thing. And I spend time trying to listen to those concerns, to how communities can help themselves. And there's many grants. And of course, Groundwork help enormously in showing that sort of roadmap of how people can make an improvement, as you said at the beginning of this meeting today. And so by listening through community partnerships, through our enabling community budgets that ward members have, we can really help and give guidance of how to plant trees and grow meadows. And, you know, as you know, this year we had a new policy of Pardon the Weeds, We're Feeding the Bees campaign. And that's just the starting point. And part of that project is making people think of what they can do to make a difference. So it changes people's behavior. I understand people have busy lives, they're paying the mortgage, they're feeding the children, but we have to start thinking about what we do, how it affects other people.
Yeah, totally agree. Jane, would you like to pick up on that as well? So the role that communities have? Oh, you're on mute, Jane.
Yeah. Well, the communities are vital to pressing and ensuring that the change that's wanted by the people in that particular area comes about. Obviously, you're going to have different requirements in different areas depending on the type of community it is. Some might be urban, some might be rural, some might be you know, colder climate, and some are warmer and have coastal erosion problems like we have here. So there's all different issues, but fundamentally, if you've got a groundswell of local communities all pressing to solve all the local problems, then you know you're pretty well there.
Lovely, thank you. Graham, do you want to? pick up on?
Yeah, I just probably echo all of that, and maybe go even further and be stronger on it, and say that I don't think a green recovery will happen unless communities are driving a lot of the action, and there's a sort of conveyor belt for effect going on here for me. So we know that at a local level, many of the solutions to the challenges that we're talking about are in the hands of local people in terms of behaviour change and different choices and so on and so forth. So there are practical solutions to how we manage our waste and how we deliver our energy needs and how we improve and look after our green spaces, all of which have got kind of potential community solutions around them. But then crucially, once that happens at an area level, and we have a kind of area-based approach to this, and we have a focus on those areas that need most support and help in achieving that kind of change, then you start to create the norms within that area, and you start to get the peer pressure working in that area, so that it just becomes more accepted and more normal that that's the way these things are done. And you get that kind of self-reinforcing effect of that behaviour change. But then crucially, the last step, and the step that we sometimes miss in all of this, is that once communities are better organised, better able and better equipped to do some of the things that we're talking about, then they're also better able to engage in the conversations with councils and other stakeholders that will be able to address some of the more systemic issues that we need to address, whether it's about planning or green infrastructure or transport and so on and so forth. And that is, we sometimes shy away from that last step, because that sometimes is where it gets a bit more challenging. And we should, all of us in this kind of space, recognise that if a community group is being vocal and challenging the status quo and challenging authority and challenging stakeholders, that's a sign of success. That's a sign of a community that feels empowered and feels equipped to have a conversation as equals with people who are responsible for the services and assets in their neighbourhood. So we shouldn't be afraid of that, but it is the uncomfortable last step on that conveyor belt. And I suppose the only other thing I'd say is that doesn't happen everywhere without support. So we know that in many places, populations are more transient. There isn't that kind of latent body of skills and capability within a local community, or people are just juggling multiple jobs in an insecure economy. So so they're time poor as well as poor in lots of other ways. So that's why it's so important that we have a kind of professionalised support infrastructure in order to support communities along that conveyor belt of development, from kind of initial interest and awareness through to engagement and then action and then influence ultimately over the things that happen in their local area.
Perfect, thank you. I think that's exactly what we're trying to achieve with the Hosey project, just getting them at least thinking about it and then just supporting them throughout the whole process, really. So Richard, do you want to just pick up on that question as well?
Yeah, happily. I always find it quite humbling when you the amount of work and the amount of enthusiasm and drive there is at a local level, and you've only got to look in the chat line to realise how many sort of local groups there are and small groups. And when I was in the RSPB, I was always totally amazed at the wasp groups and the woodlouse groups and the groups for a particular moth and the groups for any particular insect. And when you bunch them all together, there's a huge amount of knowledge and drive and power in that sort of thing. And I think that following on from what Graham says, yeah, we've got to look at the way that the steps go, and that when somebody or when a group raises an issue or raises a challenge over housing, over roads or whatever, they're always seen as a NIMBY. And you think we've got to question this constant thought that somebody who's passionate about their local area and their community should be seen to be doing it for the wrong reasons. And then we've got that's what I mean about being different and thinking differently, because we have to influence politicians, and James will be the first to say that he listens to people and he understands what they're saying and he's influenced by them, and he's got a machine that he has to feed into, and that machine then feeds into a higher machine, etc. But there seems to be a disconnect between and I'm going to be controversial now if you like, but there's a disconnect between sort of local politics and then county politics and then MPs and then into ministers, and then we've somehow got to break that down, and we've got to, an MP should be held to account. An MP should be representing its party, but also should be representing the people that vote for them. And okay, you're going to get a massive difference between the different political parties and what people are saying, but somehow we've got to make an accountability thread through that. If the ground level is really passionate about something, someone should be listening to that, filtering that, and putting that forward as we go. And by the time it gets to Westminster and the Westminster bubble, we all know that that's semi-impenetrable, and they live in a little world that revolves around things. And we shouldn't be. I suppose should we be nasty to them? I don't know. Maybe we should. Maybe we shouldn't. It's a hard job. I could never be an MP, but we somehow need to be able to make that the conveyor belt that Graham talks about go right the way through the system, and we need to be able to make a difference locally, district level, county level, and then MP level. And the national policies that are coming through at the moment should be accountable right the way back down to the floor. And we should be building on those policies to make it happen. And just because a road is a thought process that we should have a new road, with COVID, everybody's not on the roads. No one's probably going to go back to the roads for quite a while. We're not going to go back to air travel for a while. And maybe we won't go back as we did before. So maybe we do start to think in a different way and make that difference credible, if you like, in the way that we make our planning systems going forward. We've got a backlog of planning permissions that are sitting on fields. And because they've already gone through the system, there will almost certainly be houses that don't have solar panels, that aren't green, that aren't passive. How do we revisit some of this sort of stuff to bring those green credentials back into the system? Groundwork does a huge amount, and I'm very impressed with what Groundwork does on the ground, and puts those principles into motion. We need those principles into the planning systems and the strategy systems as we go forward.
Sure, perfect, thank you. So the next question really is just how can we make sure that rural communities aren't left behind in all of this? So Jane, I'll come to you first on this one.
Yeah, well, I think this is part of the problem, is that we've got urban versus rural all the time, when actually we need to have a cohesive national plan for both, as well as at a local level. You know, it's very much one area looks at the rural aspect, and another one is looking at urban, and there the twain shall meet. Whereas there's quite a lot to be learned from both. I would suggest with the rural, actually, that our time has come, because with the change with Brexit, you're going to have more reliance on what farmers are doing. That's going to be critical, whether they adapt or whether they start, giving over land to biodiversity, such as down in, in Sussex. Isabella Tree, that's going to have a big impact. And the way that, again, I go back to what I said really at the beginning, we need to look at the way we're using our land. The Centre for Alternative Technology have produced models, which they're zero carbon Britain models, which give state that we need to reduce the amount of land that's farmed for food, and increase our biodiversity. But just by changing the use of our land, we can actually hit a lot of targets, climate targets. So it's a complex picture, but I actually think for rural communities, their input's going to be absolutely vital.
Definitely, thank you. Councillor Malander, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's interesting with rural communities, particularly over COVID, that we are actually seeing that the communities are really strong and supporting each other. And we've got space. We are able to compost more. We're able to answer those questions that perhaps our urban neighbours can't. But there should definitely be a connection between the two. And, we talk about transport as rural isolation as well, and the carbon impact of transport, of visiting towns. where in fact we should look at communities in rural areas and hubs where services come to the community, not the other way around necessarily. And I'm a big fan of mobile libraries and mobile hairdressers as such, but also local farmers market. And we have to see what's around us. And I quite like the idea of using a community hub where we start, you know, sharing more, as in we grow vegetables and we sell and buy what we have in the excess. Of course, technology has been a big influence here in rural communities. Rural communities are no longer sort of the second-class citizen when policy is made. And I think particularly with technology, it's equalized everybody, and it's going to be much easier going forward to implement more environmentally friendly policies through the advent of technology. It means you can move around less and you can order online, and we can do more with technology as opposed to that we could do previously. So I think it's not as bleak as people think. And as Jane mentioned, yeah, the big elephant in the room is about land use by farming, particularly in East Suffolk. It's a largely rural community, and we all see how the farmers use their land, or, you know, well or not, particularly in a good way. So yeah, I think it's all about localization is the key, and to think about, you know, do we need to be eating pineapples all through the year that are shipped around the world? You know, we should be eating seasonally. And it's about education, isn't it, at the end of the day, of people understanding, you know, things don't appear by magic in the grocery shop. They are shipped over, and it's just what I'd quite like to see going forward. If Westminster really took this issue serious, we should have a carbon footprint on every item we buy to know a carbon value. And it's about education and informing people so we can make an informed decision. But on that question about rural communities left behind, absolutely not. I think that combined with, in fact, you almost need to buddy up local communities with towns and villages to support each other. So I think that is a positive, I think, going forward. And technology has been the key there. I think we've all seen that with Zoom meetings. We don't have to drive around everywhere. They're not the answer to all meetings, but they've definitely opened up society and communities. And I think that's important.
Definitely, thank you. Richard, do you want to get in on this?
Yeah, certainly. I think, again, interestingly, COVID has shown people's behaviours changing in some respects. So I know there was a big push about, oh dear, Costa Coffee is losing out, Starbucks is losing out. But actually, our local coffee shop did incredibly well. And people were changing their habits to sort of to buy local and to get local, because they really didn't have any choice at the time, because you couldn't travel anywhere. But once we opened up again, that continued. Our local greengrocers and our shop in my own village has maintained that continuity. People have changed their shopping patterns. Now we still need to go to supermarkets. Supermarkets play an important point, and their deliveries to people that can't get out, incredibly important. So you know, none of this is in isolation. It's about how you build this sort of stuff up, and we do need stuff from other countries, because we can't possibly do everything here. I think even if we just turned every single piece of land as we did during the war, we only ever got to 60% of our own food income. So we're always going to be importing. But it's how do you build up that package from people growing their own and getting used to growing their own, and being very used to wonky vegetables and apples with lumps in them, right the way up to, well, I do need a pineapple today, so we will go and buy them. And you shouldn't feel guilty about buying a pineapple if your carbon footprint around the day and the way that you work has already been reduced by locality. So rural communities and the way that they operate and act is incredibly important. I was lucky enough in the year 2000s to be part of the England Rural Forum. I helped set that up with an MP called Alan Michael at the time, and we looked at rural proofing and how you would actually look at making sure that rural communities weren't left behind. The downside of that was you in some respects perpetuated this urban versus rural, and I always think that's a myth. When COVID happened, most people ran out to their second homes. They came out to the countryside because they felt safer. So there's always an integration between urban and rural, and we need to sort of be able to build on the understanding, if you like, of urban and rural. We do need to build on brownfields in urban, and we probably will have to expand some rural locations at times. But it's about how do you build up that carbon footprint? How do you build up that carbon stuff? So you change the way that you work, you change your ways you behave, you change the way you buy. That reduces the carbon footprint, reduces food miles, and then you're able to go off and buy the other things as well. And should we worry about Starbucks losing money? I don't know. They don't pay much tax into this country, so should we bother worrying about them? They'll sort themselves out. We need to look at the connectivity between, you know, the rural productivity and the rural markets and the urban markets.
Lovely, thank you. Graham, finally, we'll come to you.
Yeah, I won't say much on this topic because I think a lot of good stuff has already been said, but I will just support those last points that Richard was making, and the point generally made in the chat about this disconnect between a rural conversation and urban conversation is a bit invalid these days. I see it going on in our own organisation, whereas, you know, those colleagues who are delivering activity in the heart of Manchester or London or Leeds will sometimes default to the stereotype that the countryside is full of beautiful villages full of retired stockbrokers that can kind of look after themselves and life's pretty. But you know, in many places we know that you may be able to see more green spaces, but you can't necessarily access them. It's harder to get around physically because of transport issues. If you're not personally mobile, it's harder to connect digitally because of broadband issues. So I think the conversation here, it goes back to inequality and goes back to the need of local communities. So if we're going to empower and equip communities to be driving climate action, to be at the heart of a green recovery, and we want to embed that behaviour change, which is so fundamental to all of this, then all of that starts by addressing the issues that present barriers to people engaging in those collective activities. So unless we're kind of addressing those issues of rural exclusion and isolation and lack of connectivity, we're not going to get off the starting blocks in terms of mobilizing communities around climate action. So this conversation around climate and around green recovery, for me, has got to have that kind of fairness and equality embedded within it if it's going to make any kind of progress.
Sure, thank you very much. So I think we'll make this our final question now, because time is running away from us. But thinking about community hubs now, what role do they have in all of this? Graham, do you want to carry on?
Yes, yeah, we'll do. So yes, I mean, there's a definition point here. What's a community hub? And we could spend the next 3 hours debating and discussing that. So I think we know what we're talking about, which is places where a number of different activities go on at once, where there's co-located services that act as a kind of basis for voluntary community activity, and from which you can deliver a wide range of outcomes that benefit people in terms of their health and well-being, and can provide a focus for action on other stuff like climate or resilience planning and so on and so forth. And I think that kind of structure, that kind of way of working is fundamentally important to addressing some of the points that we've talked about today, because you need that space that provides a platform for people to get involved in local decision making. And if you can engage people in making decisions and being active in a place that delivers an actual benefit and a service right in the heart of their neighbourhood, that's the first step on that conveyor belt that encourages people and incentivizes people to get much more widely involved in civic action. So I think those kind of local hubs are fundamentally important for that reason. And you can see them when they work really, really well. So, in our network, we're managing a hub in Blackpool, in the middle of, Blackpool's biggest social housing estate, the Grange Estate, which is the most deprived part of Blackpool, which is one of the most deprived places in the country. And it's a very simple concept where there's a building that used to be run by the local authority and nobody really went there because they weren't really sure why they were supposed to go there. That's now been turned into a community centre with a cafe and a shop, where you can buy goods without money if you've earned some credits through volunteering in the community centre. It's got a space to run cookery workshops. It's got a space to run fitness classes. It's where the housing officer comes to provide advice. It's where health visitors come to run surgeries, and wrapping around the outside of it is a really fantastic community allotment and orchard that's growing produce that's sold in the cafe. So you can see all these wonderful kind of interconnecting benefits happening in a relatively small place, but impacting on a very large estate within Blackpool. And just talking to the people that use that place as volunteers, I think the real lesson we've learned from that is twofold, really. One is that those people that come to those places and use up those places, they're not service users, they're not beneficiaries, they're not clients, they're not customers, they're all volunteers. They all contribute something, and that's equally valued. Whatever they're doing in that place, they're all contributing something, and their contribution means something. And then the other big lesson we've learned is that does need some professional underpinning. So yes, it's community owned, community run in terms of decision making, but that professional support in the background means that when people do arrive at that hub and want to get involved, but they have more significant challenges in their personal life, they need more acute support, they might need referring to specialist services. There's actually some professional presence in those places that enables that to happen quickly, smoothly, efficiently, and sometimes invisibly, so that it doesn't kind of disrupt the relationships that form in those places. So it's a really, really valuable model, and we should do everything that we can to replicate and roll out that good practice.
Lovely, thank you. And Councillor Malander, do you want to just pick up on the role that community hubs have?
Yeah, I'll keep this very brief. They are crucial, absolutely crucial. And it doesn't have to be a village hall. It could be the pub. It could be anywhere where people collect. And I think when we look at reducing our carbon footprint, they are crucial, because you need services to come to a village community and to a hub. There's no point 20 people all driving their cars to go to an appointment to see one person in the local town if that person in the local town comes to the community, and then you have less of that carbon footprint. Not only that, is we have proven over what's been happening that we do believe in society, and we are social animals, and there is a sense, and I get this when I speak to a group of people who are environmentally minded like I am, there's a real sense of power and of being able to achieve something when we work together. By having community hubs where you can meet, as Graham had said, that is really important to swap ideas and to help the weaker members, and to look at that inequality of, I mean, I do a lot of work where we're trying to connect people who are experts on computers and technology with those that aren't, or isolation, where people who are more sociable are talking to people who live on their own and want that connection. So it really brings the community together, and that is the key. We can't achieve this on our own, and we have to believe that collectively we can make a difference. That's really important, and those hubs are crucial. And of course, it's about ownership of your community. If you all have a community hub you use for a community breakfast, putting in solar panels, having allotments, it all brings that engagement, which is so important. So yeah, they are the icing on the cake for living in a rural community, is of having that central area where you all come together and get to know each other. We all want to know our neighbours, right?
Lovely, thanks so much. So Jane, I'll come to you. If you could just try and keep this as brief as possible, because we have only got a few minutes left, but it'd be great to hear your thoughts on the role that community hubs have.
Yes, well, I just think they're a fantastic opportunity for every member of the community to get together and to actually imagine how they would like to have their local area. I can't think of anything better. Lots of people with lots of ideas and making local decisions that impact on them. So it would take into account any issues with poverty and inequalities of technology and so on, and really, meet the needs of that particular community. And every community is different. It's unique to itself. So, but we need to blend them all together and have a massive green recovery with them all doing all their fantastic stuff.
Thank you so much. So I think we'll wrap up the Q&A session there. Just quickly say thank you to all the panelists. Your thoughts are so valuable. It's been great to listen to you all speaking. So I think we'll see if we can take at least one question from the audience. So I think Kerry, you're trying to keep an eye on this.
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me, Sarah?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, we've had some great questions, some thoughtful questions, and actually some really interesting chat that's been going on in the panel here. So to pick up actually on some crossovers with the chat here, we've had one question from Charles, which is kind of challenging this idea that it starts with communities. And his point being that actually that there is so many other things at play here, so many other vested interests that it doesn't matter what communities do, it kind of pales into insignificance in comparison. So I don't know if anybody in the panel fancies picking that up and the value of community action.
Do you want me to jump in here?
Yeah,
I'm very happy to have a go at that one, and just politely and respectfully just pass back the baton, really, because I would say that the more focus we have on communities leading action in their local areas, the more that is likely to galvanize action amongst local politicians in the first instance, and then national politicians in the second instance. Now, I'll be the first to say it's tough when you look at national political agendas to understand where the priority lies for supporting community action on climate change. But I think I've seen enough over the years to convince me that the more you can demonstrate and point to a groundswell of committed, capable, empowered citizens all pushing in the same direction, the more that does gradually, sometimes subtly, feed its way into political decision-making, policy and funding at a national level. So whilst I absolutely, again, will be the first to agree that we need to keep battering at the door of central government to say we need more action, we need more priority, we need more urgency, we need more transparency about all of this stuff, unless we're doing the other half of the job by demonstrating that communities are passionate and capable of driving some of this change, then we're unlikely to get that political moment to happen.
Yeah, Sarah, if I could just jump in, just to say you're absolutely right. I would say on the whole, a lot of the Westminster politicians don't get the urgency of doing something environmentally positive, and also are not listening to what people want. We're getting the wrong politicians in the wrong roles. We need people to start answering the questions that society needs to answer. And there is so much interest and wanting to do something. It is got to be community led. If you wait for Westminster to do something, you'll be waiting forever. If you start at the community, they will suddenly take notice and will be interested. So it's about how you use your vote. It's about younger adults how they use their voice and of being heard. We have to articulate this at all levels. And it's about partnership working through community partnerships, working with business and industry. It's not one area can fix it. We've all got to work together. So it's absolutely getting that message across to those that control power, those that control resources, and those that make a decision that affect our lives. It's a difficult challenge. I absolutely get it, but it's about expectations and by pushing all the time. And it's got to start ground roots up, unfortunately, because it won't filter down. What's quite interesting about the environment, it crosses politics. We all know on here there's people from different political backgrounds, but it doesn't matter. It's about doing the right thing, and the right thing is by putting the environment at the core of your decision process.
Perfect, thanks, James. Richard, did you just want to have one last comment?
Yeah, quite quickly, I couldn't agree more with what James has just said. You must write to your MP. You'll get a cut and paste answer 9 times out of 10, but ultimately, the more people get involved in that comment and writing, the better. When they receive 20,000 letters, something has to happen. You can't wait for Westminster, and there'll be some national decisions that you probably ultimately can't change, but you can make a difference if you engage. And it's sometimes really difficult because you'll get, as I say, a cut and paste answer, but don't give up. Constantly question and put through. I've written to my new MP since the last election 11 times in the last since December, and I have had some answers, but I also, when I met him pre-lockdown, he did say, "Oh well, crikey, I didn't realise that, and I didn't realise the groundswell of interest." So don't ever think that you can't make a difference. It may be slow, it may be harder, but we really do need to be able to put the pressure, especially onto MPs, to understand. I was talking and listening to the president of the NFU the other day, who was talking about the fact that she did eventually get into the agricultural bill that a scrutiny committee will look at food standards and look at the way food is delivered in the new trade agreements. That would never have happened had not most farmers and most people that were interested in it lobbied through. And that lobbying did make a difference. So yeah, you're right. It does at times feel that you haven't got anything, you haven't got any power, but you have, and don't ever give up.
Perfect, thank you. I am going to wrap it up there because we are out of time now. Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much to East Suffolk Council for letting us host this Fringe event during their Community Partnerships Annual Forum. Again, thank you so much to our panellists, you've been amazing. And also to the Suffolk Climate Change Partnership, thank you. I know we haven't got around to answering all the questions. We will try and get back to you afterwards if we can. So please just bear with us on that. Otherwise, like I say, the webinar will be put up on the Green Suffolk website, so feel free to check back afterwards and share it with colleagues. Other than that, thank you very much for your time and thank you for attending. I hope you enjoyed it.